Good afternoon, gents. Welcome to my 2026 version of Just in Time videos. You'll see on my YouTube channel that last year I focused on paper 1, and this year I'm going to be focusing on paper 2. The goal of these videos is not to help you learn by rote or learn particular poetry concepts off by heart. The goal of these videos is to remind you of the poetry skills that you might need to study for and master the trial and final exams. So in terms of what resources you need to study alongside this video, you will need your English Home Language Revised 2024 notes. If you're tuning in from a different school, your teacher might have used the Imagined Worlds Anthology as the main source from which they drew your poetry notes. Then the Queenians will also need their figures of speech cheat sheet. This is a list of figures of speech that we've been compiling over the last 18 months or so that have come up in the different texts that we've studied. And then lastly, you are at the stage in your matric career where you should be practicing past papers, not to learn memos or concepts off by heart, but to understand the way in which the questions are asked and practice analyzing them. So, before we get to the complicated grade 12 stuff, let's talk about this. What is the purpose of poetry? Newspaper articles are written to educate or inform. Cartoons are often written to make people laugh, to entertain. So what do poets do? So poets share feelings like joy, anger, sadness, fear, or wonder. You'll see this is a junior school note, very basic concept. They tell stories and they send a message. All right, something for the audience to think about. They can be humorous and they can provide description, but basically poetry is a text that communicates a message, and that message usually has to do primarily with something that the author wants you to think about, the central message in the poem, or something that the author wants you to feel, the emotions, the tone, the mood, or the attitudes conveyed in the poem. And these are the two questions, gents, that you need to answer absolutely any time you tackle a poem. Whether it's seen or unseen, everything else is going to center around fulfilling the poet's purpose. In poetry, there's of course a toolbox that we use. There's some key concepts that we need to know the meaning of so that we can successfully tackle the poem. Please note that at the FET level, a poem will never be only literal. There are those level 1 and 2 questions that you might be asked regarding the real meaning of the poem, something that physically happens, but every single poem is going to delve into the area of the figurative. And of course, the figurative meaning of the poem is the imagined or metaphorical meaning. To understand the figurative meaning or to decode the figurative meaning, there are those different concepts that we can look at. For example, theme. Theme, of course, relates to the message or universal idea that is being brought to light in the poem. There's structure, which is very tactical in a poem. So structure always refers to the architect or organizational elements of a piece of writing. And in a poem, you've been looking at things like stanza, line length, rhythm, and rhyme for quite a long time now. They're internal and external structural elements that make meaning in a poem. For example, if the rhythm and the line length in the poem is very irregular, the idea would be to make the reader feel a sense of discomfort or chaos. Whereas if we follow certain structural patterns like rhyme scheme or even detailed patterns like a sonnet, then those would carry meaning as well. All right, so look out for the architecture of the poem. Interestingly enough, as I'm sure your teachers told you by now, punctuation also forms a key part of structure in paper 2 and in poetry, and so you should revise your punctuation notes that you have for paper 1 when you're going to tackle a poem, that you know what the different poetry means. You should also look out for enjambment, right? The build up or increase in intensity in certain feelings or emotions that is brought about using a run on lines. Then make sure you know the meaning of diction. Diction, of course, referring to the dictionary or strategic word choice. When you're looking at word choice, there are a few things you're going to look at: that you know the meaning of the key words in the poem, whether words are being used denotatively, in other words, their real meaning, or connotatively, their implied or imagined meaning. And you're going to have to think about why a poet chose certain words strategically. Because poems are quite short texts, every word tends to count. Then, if you ever come across the word syntax, they're talking about the word order. So sentences have a general subject, verb, object structure, and when we play around with word order, it will always be to highlight certain things. Imagery is a word you come across very often in poetry, and when they refer to imagery, they're referring to that figurative dimension of the poem, the picture being created in your imagination. Literary device. Sometimes you're asked to identify a literary device, and for some reason this throws candidates. A literary device is simply, guys, a figure of speech or a poetic technique, those things found on your cheat sheet. Now, the last thing I want to focus on in terms of key concepts is the concept of feeling, the concept of atmosphere, tone, and attitude. If you look at the diagnostic report for English Home Language from 2025, many students did not answer the tone questions in the paper well, questions that are largely considered to be relatively low-hanging fruit. So what does tone mean, gents? Tone means the feelings that the speaker or the character is experiencing, right? And so that's really one of the two main mandates of a poem. It's to make us think about things and it's to make us experience emotions. And so having tone words in your vocabulary is really, really important. Not just happy, sad, good, bad. If you are somebody who struggles with vocabulary, go and spend some time on an AI app and just learn some of the basic tone words and their meanings. Happy tone words such as enthusiastic versus joyful versus content. Sad tone words such as angry versus ambivalent, indifferent, versus horrified. Just look up some of the different tone words and the different layers of emotion that they convey. Then students also need to know the difference between tone and mood. Mood is different in terms of to tone because mood speaks to the emotional environment or the atmosphere that is being created in the poem. So if I give an example, right now my tone is excited but factual, and I'm really passionate about what I'm teaching, but the mood in the room might be quite somber or tense because these are the key moments before you approach an exam or a test, and you're just trying to get those last few clues in. So tone refers to one speaker, one emotion from one particular character, whereas atmosphere refers to the general mood in the room. Okay, so let's leave it at that for now, and we'll look at examples in text. And then the word attitude is also very similar to tone, and attitude is also a feeling word, but it's about the emotional viewpoint or stance that is being put across. So in the African poetry, for example, the post-colonial poetry, we might ask you of the attitude of the speaker, and then you might say something like, he's being defiant against the oppressor. It shows the particular worldview that he's portraying in terms of the feelings and the message in the poem itself. Right. So those key concepts are really the tools, the hammers and the chisels and the spanners that you can fit into the different parts of the poem to find meaning in the poem. Now, what candidates often do is that they try and learn the different aspects of a poem off by heart. You'll take the notes and the line-by-line analysis that your teacher's given you, and you'll try and cram them into your head. Gents, this is not a very particularly useful way to study, because you really need to understand what's happening in these poems so that you can take the information and you can shapeshift it and play around with it so that it answers the particular questions that you get in the exam on the day. So what I always suggest to my learners is that they take the information they have at hand and they make it their own. And the way you make it your own is by taking an A4 piece of paper and creating a table on that piece of paper similar to the one that I've got here. You then obviously go and populate it with the relevant information about that particular poem. So what does the poem make you think about? The theme or the main message in the poem is something you want to capture, sometimes a bit of setting or contextual information there too. You want to know what the main internal and external structure of the poem is so that you can answer questions about structure, the mood and tone in the poem, tricky words and diction. Now, tricky words refers to words you don't know the meaning of. Obviously, poets convey meaning through words. So when you spot a word in a poem and you don't know the meaning, do a quick Google of the meaning of that word. But then the poet is also going to choose particular diction, special words that pack a lot of punch, that convey a lot of meaning in terms of imagery, and creating a picture of our imaginations very quickly. Notice that the diction of words doesn't only mean the literal definition, but it also means the meaning of the word in context and the picture that it paints in our heads in context. We'll look out for that when we do the morning sun is shining as an example shortly. Then imagery I'm saying over and over because it refers to the pictures created in our imagination that put across a message or a feeling within the poem. Note, guys, that there are different types of imagery. Imagery can be conveyed through figures of speech. Imagery can also be conveyed by appealing to our five senses. For example, we'll often have visual imagery, where the poet creates a striking image through his word choice or his figures of speech. Olfactory imagery, where he attracts our attention to a certain smell and appeals to our sense of smell. And then auditory imagery. Think of those things like alliteration, assonance, and onomatopoeia that create a sound in our imagination, and they often help set the atmosphere of the poem. So imagery can be figures of speech, can be diction, but it can also just be an appeal to the reader or listener's senses. And then lastly, note the figures of speech that come up in the poem, study them beforehand, and also study your cheat sheet so that you have a working definition of the key concepts that we do test. Because sometimes you would have studied the personification in a specific line over and over and over again, and then they'll ask you to frame it as a metaphor, or they'll ask you to see the contrast within the personification, or the juxtaposition, or the irony, and then you will have to be able to discuss those things. All right, and discussing a figure of speech lies in understanding the definition so that you can apply the specific example to the definition. For example, if I have a simple metaphor or simile, the boy is as fast as lightning, and I'm doing a poem about athletics, then that's immediately going to make sense. You're going to know that the boy is being compared to lightning, but you're going to have to be able to apply the definition. Simile compares two things with similar characteristics for effect. So what is the similar characteristic between the boy and the lightning? It's that they are fast. It's a natural fast force that lightning has that the boy also has. Why is it effective? It paints the picture in our imagination of the boy sprinting across the athletics track effortlessly, the way lightning strikes effortlessly. Do you see what I mean by getting to effectiveness? You aren't going to get marks at matric level for telling me what is being compared. All right, so let's now look at a poem as an example so that I can show you how we apply our skill set and our tools to a particular poem. The poem that we're going to be looking at is The Morning Sun is Shining by Olive Schreiner. let me just give you some contextual background. So Olive Schreiner is a South African poet, was a South African poet. She wrote the famous novel, The Story of an African Farm, and she was an early feminist and an early activist who spoke for the rights of people of color. However, this poem that we're going to study actually looks more at the universal theme of loss or mourning. So you're going to notice, gents, that we do two broad categories of poetry in our syllabus. We do our European and American poems, where we look at themes related to the human condition. So loss, mourning, the appreciation of nature, isolation, solitude, you'll recognize that word, that type of thing where we're looking at a universal thought and the emotions that go with it. And then our post-colonial poetry that is very much less formally structured for the most part than the European poetry, and relies a lot on storytelling and speaks to themes related to the post-colonial condition. So the suffering that people of color went through under colonization and the fight for freedom that followed, with a lot of feelings and emotions related to oppression, defiance, resilience, suffering, etc., etc., distinctly political poems. Now, despite this being an African poem, it's not one of Schreiner's political pieces. It is a piece that speaks to a very personal experience of hers. You guys know the difference between author and speaker, right? The author of the poem is the person who wrote the poem, and then the speaker in the poem is a character who is conveying their story. So the two are not always the same. Many literary critics argue that the two are the same in this poem, and they think that Schreiner is writing a poem about the loss of her baby daughter. However, you don't have to write about that in the exam, because the context of the poem itself only speaks to loss and bereavement and being without somebody who is dear to you and how that changes your worldview. So I've included a picture of myself here just to give you a little backstory in terms of my link to this poem. In the picture, I'm standing at Olive Schreiner's final resting place, which is a sarcophagus at the top of the mountain at Buffelshoek in the Cradock district. It's an 18K hike there and back to get up to her final resting place, and she rests there with her ex-husband, her baby daughter's remains, and her Jack Russell's remains. And you'll see that she has a deep love for nature because the photo itself is embedded in nature, and we see the colors yellow, green, and brown, which feature quite prominently in the poem. So Schreiner was a lover of nature, and she did have a deep, deep appreciation for nature, which is something you're going to see featuring in the poem. Right, so let's get into the poem. You will see, gents, that there are no notes on my slide. The reason there are no notes on my slide is because you have to develop your understanding of the poem. So when I've said something that is groundbreaking or that is new to you, pause and add it into your own notes. Or as I go along, listen to my line-by-line analysis and then make yourself a table where you break down the different parts of the poem and you fit the line-by-line analysis under its relevant skill set. All right, because that is how we learn actively. Okay, so what did I say? When we get a poem, the first thing that we do, we read through it and we ask ourselves, what does it make me think about? How does it make me feel? So let's go. The morning sun is shining. The morning sun is shining on the green, green willow tree, and sends a golden sunbeam to dance upon my knee. The fountain bubbles merrily, the yellow locusts spring. Of life and light and sunshine, the happy brown birds sing. The earth is clothed with beauty, the air is filled with song. The yellow thorn trees load the wind with odors sweet and strong. There, is a hand I never touch and a face I never see. Now what is sunshine? What is song? Now what is light to me? It's quite deep. What does the poem make me think about? It makes me think of the absolute beauty in nature, an early morning sunrise with beautiful colors and the sun welcoming me in its embrace, dancing on my knee, the earth being clothed in beauty. Clothes can be absolutely opulent and wonderful and make us feel very pretty. But then the thorn trees are loaded with wind, with odors sweet and strong. A thorn makes me think of something in nature that can hurt me, right? Loading something gives me the idea that this person is carrying a burden, that maybe the clothes that the earth was being personified to wear were carrying something heavier underneath. And then there in line 13, there's the literal answer. There's a hand I never touch and a face I never see. So there's somebody that I loved, and that somebody is gone. Immediately, my thoughts change and my feelings change. My feelings move from being bright and cheerful and light-hearted to being sad in terms of mournful, grieving, melancholic. There's something really sad that the author is carrying here beneath the surface, or the speaker. Now, what is sunshine? What is song? Now, what is light to me? So, rhetorical questions always have an answer that is obvious. And the obvious answer established by that word never, and the fact that someone is literally gone from her life, means that the obvious answer is no. The sunshine and the song and the light does not mean anything to me anymore, right? Because now in the present, this person is mourning. And often when we're mourning, it's a time of darkness. It's a sterile time where we feel like there's nothing beautiful around us. And the speaker shares that sentiment. And all of the beauty that the mourning carried is suddenly gone as they remember the person that they are grieving for. So the poem makes me think about the beauty of nature, then it makes me think about loss, and then it makes me think about how temporary beauty and joy can be, how they can be taken away from me so easily, and I can be left with something much heavier. They're the main themes in the poem, all right? What does the poem make me think about? And then in terms of feeling, there are two distinctly different feelings. The first stanza, bleeding over into lines 9 and 10, fills me with light-hearted feelings of joy, contentment, reverence, appreciation for this beautiful day. In line 11 comes a warning that I'm going to be burdened with something because of that verb load. And then towards the end of the second stanza and characterizing the second stanza, I have this feeling of melancholy, heaviness, grief, mourning, where something that was very dear has been ripped away. All right. So that is the main message and the main feelings or mood or atmosphere, tone in this poem. Now let's have a look at some of the key words in the poem and the key figures of speech that can help us to really unpack this poem and answer questions about it fruitfully. Let's start by having a look at the title. Title can sometimes be part of structure because the title can either support or go against the main message in the poem. And if we look at the title of this poem, it contains the word morning. The morning sun is shining. And I immediately recognize that as a pun because yes, the poem speaks about the sun shining early on in the day, but the homophone for that morning that you see there is the one that has the U inserted, where we talk about mourning and we talk about grief or bereavement. So there's a pun in the title. All right. In stanza 1, if I look at structure, I see words that rhyme. I see tree and knee, A and A. spring and sing, see and see. So I see an alternating rhyme scheme. And that alternating rhyme scheme is something that adds cheer to the poem, makes it sound almost childish, song-like, all right? So a poem that can be said to little ones. So it adds cheer to the poem in terms of structure. But then in the second stanza, we still have that alternating rhyme scheme, but the cheer is gone, and the diction shows us, and the diction and the in terms of structure, the rhetorical question at the end shows us that the poem loses its cheer towards the end. All right, so not too much that's significant in terms of structure, other than the fact that the main tone in stanza 1 is cheerful and the main tone in stanza 2 is melancholic or depressive or mournful. Let's go to our line by line. The morning sun is shining on the green, green willow tree and sends a golden sunbeam to dance upon my knee. Very positive diction there. Very bright early morning and lovely green imagery coming up. Green in poetic terms often represents fertility, but in this poem we would say that it just represents abundance. A world that is lush and green is a world that has an abundance of beauty in nature. All right? And so the sun being golden, again, the color gold is associated with opulence, having enough of something, having a great amount of something. It's a very sunny morning. It looks beautiful. It's cheerful. And then the sunbeam is even personified. We're told that the sunbeam is dancing upon her knee, right? And that personification shows a joyous movement, and it shows the sun engaging with the speaker and drawing them into the moment of joy. All right. Do you see the personal pronoun my? The personal pronoun my shows that the speaker is experiencing the moment and that they're being drawn into the joy of the moment. So that's going to be quite significant later. Line 5, the fountain bubbles merrily, right? So bubbles, b-b-b-b-b-b, alliteration within the word, maybe even onomatopoeia, and it's a cheerful sound that water makes when the fountain is gushing, sending its water flowing along merrily. Merrily is an adverb, it means happily. So everything is very cheerful. The water's flowing. The flow of water, of course, makes us feel calm. Think of the sound of water flowing. The yellow locust spring, the color yellow, once again in nature, associated with blossoms, with life, with a joyful, natural state of living, right? Locusts are little animals that jump, all right? Even though locusts also devour and eat crops, locusts jump and they're happy and there's enough for them to eat. Spring means to jump in a happy way. So the animals in nature are cheerful and going about their business. And what is the fountain singing of? Or what are the locusts jumping about? They're jumping about life and light and sunshine. Sorry, I keep struggling with this cursor. They speak of life and light and sunshine. Listen to the alliteration in line 6 and 7. It's a light, calm sound that just shows how everything in nature is flowing. All right. And the happy brown birds sing. And she qualifies the brown birds being happy with an adjective, which just shows that nature is in a good state. It's a harmonious morning. Of course, there we see a new color, and the color is brown. It could just be a color in nature. The speaker could just be describing the natural scene, the felt that I showed you in the previous slide. But in nature, brown can also be a clue that winter is approaching. In nature, brown shows the season of death coming along, right? Winter. So that word could be an early foreshadowing that something's about to go wrong. We move into stanza 2. The earth is clothed with beauty. Now look at the word clothed. Firstly, it definitely shows that there's personification. The earth can't really wear clothes, and it means that the earth is putting on something beautiful. And of course, guys, our clothes can be used to disguise an uglier internal reality. So that word clothes can be quite significant when we get back to the entire message of the poem. Because even though the morning looks beautiful right now and it's decorating the earth, there can be something more troublesome lying beneath for the speaker. What does the earth represent here? The earth is being used as a physical and whole thing which represents nature. Okay, the earth is being used in the place of nature, I suppose, to add depth to the poem, but then it's also, and excuse my pronunciation of this word, it could also be an example of synecdoche, right? Or synecdoche, where you have a characteristic of something or a symbol of something representing a whole. Like when we say wheels represent a car, the earth represents nature, and it's just another beautiful way to describe how the natural element, as far as she can see, is beautiful. Okay. The air is filled with song. The air is literally singing. Air is something that's generally light and calm, and song is generally cheerful. So by all accounts, on the surface of things, it's literally a beautiful morning. Now in line 11, we have subtle changes in diction, which show us that we're moving towards something going wrong, right? So those subtle changes in diction come from the word load and the words thorn tree. Okay, so if you think of the noun, if you think of a thorn tree, yes, the thorn tree is yellow, which means it's blooming, it's releasing pollen, right? But a thorn tree has thorns, and thorns are things which have the capacity to represent hurt and suffering. So they're thorn trees in nature, and they are loading the wind. Now, to load something means to put more and more onto it. Please go and load the bakkie for me. You're putting stuff on the bakkie, right? So the verb load can mean to burden, all right? So if we think of the yellow thorn trees burdening the wind, it makes complete figurative sense for me because that pollen on the thorn trees gives me allergy, so it burdens me. So literally, the thorn trees are packing the wind with this yellow pollen that has sweet and strong odors. But now if I think of it figuratively, in terms of the context of the entire poem, those odors that are on the wind, those sweet and strong odors, may actually be burdensome odors, the odors of death perhaps, the smell of a corpse perhaps. And to strengthen the imagery for you here, Olive Schreiner had her daughter's body embalmed, and she actually carried it with her everywhere she went. It traveled with her for the duration of her life until they were both taken to their final resting place at Buffelshoek. So when I think of odors sweet and strong loading the wind here, I think of the smell of death and embalming fluids, but I'm stretching it way far now into the factual context of the author. In terms of the speaker, just know that the thorn trees bring the message that there's something burdensome carrying on the wind in nature, and it's an overpowering something. And she completes the thought. She ends line 12 with a full stop, okay? And then she starts a new idea. And the new idea is a very literal idea. There, right? It's a preposition that indicates a specific place. She says, there is a hand I never touch and a face I never see. So the hand and the face that she never sees relates to the fact that she has lost somebody very close to her and she can never ever see them again. All right? At least not living. And the word never, the adverb never here, is very powerful because it's a definite word. There's absolutely no doubt that the person is gone. All right? So she's far removed from her beloved. The thought of beautiful nature has been stopped with a full stop, and she's going back to the very literal fact that her beloved is gone. And there the mood in the poem changes, and it becomes mournful, and it becomes melancholic, because she is grieving somebody that she's lost. In lines 15 and 16, there's a semicolon at the end of line 14. So the next piece of sentence is now obviously going to be a clause which can stand on its own, all right? And she says, now what is sunshine? What is song? Now what is light to me? I've explained this when I explained the main meaning of the poem. Now, as she wakes up to the present reality and she stops appreciating the beauty of nature, the reality is much more harsh. And in the reality, she asks us a rhetorical question to which the obvious answer is no. It means nothing. Okay? Sunshine and song and light and all of this beauty and appreciation and tranquility that she saw in nature early in the poem is now gone. Because when she remembers her loss, all she experiences is darkness. She experiences futility. There's no point to any of this beauty because she is stuck thinking of the death that she experienced. And so the beauty of nature is short-lived. It's overwhelmed by deep feelings of loss. And we realize that the brief, peaceful feelings of joy that natural beauty can bring to us can easily be overshadowed by internal turmoil or the reality of loss. And that, gentlemen, is our poem. Go through it carefully, use your line-by-line analysis to reinforce what I've told you, come to understand this poem intrinsically. All right, so now that I've taken you through the key concepts or skill sets that you need to understand a poem, it's probably important that we practice together because skills need to be put into practice. So I first just want to draw your attention to something that I've been teaching with regard to analyzing questions, all right? Despite the fact that poems are quite short, guys, poems are incredibly text-rich, and every word, every line has a lot of meaning, which builds on to greater meaning. And so when we get this text in front of us, we're familiar with it, we revise for ourselves the main meaning and the main feelings in the poem, and then we need to do a deep analysis of the questions to make sure that we give the marker what they require. And so if you've watched my paper 1 revision videos, I've gone through the process of decoding a question. And the process of decoding a question requires that you understand 3 things, and I'm scribbling here in the bottom corner, all right? The first thing that you need to understand is the question word. And I'm very sure your LO teachers have already gone through the meaning of the different question words with you. Find that list in your LO textbook and learn it. It will help you for all your subjects. So some question words require you to identify facts and give brief answers, but other question words ask you to explain facts and give detailed answers. The third and final layer then is that there are questions that ask you to interpret beyond normal factual explanation, where you've got to explain layers of emotion, you've got to explain what's implied by words, or you need to give your logical judgment of a situation. Those are your 3 marker questions, and the question words are things like critically discuss or comment on or account for. All right. The next component of a question is the focus area. Teachers will sometimes call the focus area the key words. And within poetry, we have lots of different focus areas that we might come across. They might give us a line reference, so we might have to closely analyze a particular line to get to our answer. They might tell us to refer to something in our toolkit, like diction or imagery or figures of speech or tone. And they might tell us to consider the context of the poem or speak in the poem as a whole. And this is something that's really important. The diagnostic report speaks about the fact that many of our candidates are answering the poems based on the general meaning of a context, the real world meaning of a context, rather than taking the meaning of a particular concept and then placing it in the context of the poem. The last sentence of any answer in a poetry question should relate us back to the poem itself and say what it means in the context of that poem. All right. So the sunbeams dancing upon my knee in the morning sun is shining shows the intimate experience that she's having with nature and how nature is beautiful and it brings cheer or lightheartedness to her mood. It's not just about dancing and celebrating generally or sunbeams generally bringing cheer. It's about the intimate experience of beauty and lightheartedness and cheer for the speaker. There's just an example. And then lastly, special instructions. This is where so many candidates lose marks. So firstly, mark allocation is a special instruction. If something is for 3 marks and you write one sentence, you're going to get 1 mark, not 3 marks. Okay? So special instructions tell you whether you've got to use your own words, whether you've got to quote from the poem, whether you've got to substantiate with reference to the poem, whether you have to relate it to the poem as a whole or to the setting of the poem. Think of lots of the questions in The Child Who Was Shot Dead by Soldiers at Nyanga refer you to the apartheid setting. And then you've got to bring that setting into the poem when you answer your questions. So special instructions are so important, especially for your 3 markers. It's been brought to my attention recently that in a contextual, you can approach a 3 marker the same way that you approach the body paragraph of an essay, where you actually peel, where you give your point, you explain your point, you give an example, reference to the poem, like a quote or substantiation from the poem, and then you link it back to the poem again, so that you come full circle and you make sure that you get all 3 your marks. For those of you who use Mr. Charasika's IC method for paper 1, you can also very successfully use that for your 3-mark questions in poetry. Right, now let's look at the actual practical. Let's decode some questions here in this past paper for The Morning Sun is Shining. Okay, 3.1 says identify and explain the mood created in lines 1 to 4. So you have 2 question words here, identify and explain, all right? So you're going to need a brief fact, which you're going to have to justify with a fact from the poem. Your focus area is the mood, and then your special instruction is that you must look only at lines 1 to 4 for 2 marks. Right, so what is the mood in lines 1 to 4? For me, the mood in lines 1 to 4 is immediately light-hearted, joyful, appreciative, reverent of nature. How do I know this? I know this because the sun is shining, and the sun shining has positive connotations, especially with reference to color or visual imagery in this poem. The willow tree is very green, repetition of the word green, to show that it is a lush and beautiful scene that we're looking at, and that the sun is golden, and golden bringing connotations of richness. There, I've got my 2 marks. If I want to say it's light-hearted and playful, then I might use line 4 to justify the mood. And I might say that the sun dancing upon the knee is being personified to show that the sunbeam is literally trying to intimately cheer the speaker up. All right. Make the speaker feel playful. Dancing is a playful action. Okay. Let us go to question 3.2. Discuss the effectiveness of the use of color in stanza 1. Discuss means that we have to give factual detail, obviously in poetry always with reference to the poem. Focus area, the use of color, and I made a little yes motion for myself when I saw this poem, because this is straight level 1 and 2 reorganizing information that I've studied. And then the special instruction is that they want 2 marks to come from stanza 1. So the colors in stanza 1, green, green, golden, yellow, and brown. So the colors that are used in this stanza, guys, are all very vivid colors, and they're all colors that speak to natural imagery. And so the colors are effective because they show us that nature is being described in great detail and in a positive fashion if we look at the colors green and golden and yellow, because it speaks to abundance, fertility, blossoms, all of the good things in nature. But then if we wanted to take it to a third mark just to be very sure, we could also say that a brown color in nature could be the foreshadowing of the season that relates to death. All right, 3.2, I think I've got it in the bag. 3.3, refer to lines 11 and 12. Immediately I see the ellipsis here, and the ellipsis in a sentence mean that something has been omitted. So let me go and read lines 11 and 12 to make sure I know what's going on. Let me also just change color here so that you can see where I'm working. In line 11 and 12, it says, the yellow thorn trees load the wind with odors sweet and strong. Immediately, millions of the things that I've studied are going through my head, and I see that this is a turning point in the poem, and negative imagery is coming in with those words, thorn trees load. Now, let me look at 3.3.1, identify a figure of speech used in these lines. Identify, beautiful, because they want me just to state something quick. Figure of speech, focus area, yay, I've studied this. I already know that I'm certainly going to be discussing personification. And then special instructions, make sure I'm in the correct line reference. Okay, so the figure of speech, personification, 1 mark in the bag, easy, easy. 3.2, comment on how this image adds to meaning in the poem. All right, so firstly, question word, comment on. Comment on means that we're actually giving a judgment of sorts. We're giving our opinion on why or how something has been included in the poem. Okay, so give me your opinion why. When you see comment on, write this down if you didn't know. It means give me your opinion why this image adds meaning to the poem. While we're here, I just want to add in a little side note on account for. Lots of you don't know what account for means. Account for simply means give a reason, and you need to think of your reason why the author has done something when you see account for. Back to the question at hand, this image, okay, do you see that they are not limiting you to the figure of speech here? They're limiting you to the image, and so you can look at lines 11 and 12 holistically. Please be very careful. In last year's November paper, 3.3.2 referred to the entire line reference that you were given, and some learners only referred to the figure of speech at 3.3.1, and then they missed a mark. So look back to 3.3, we're at lines 11 and 12. That's our special instruction. Focus area is imagery, question word is comment on. I know this answer because I've interpreted it over and over again. Okay, the picture of a thorn tree immediately creates an image of danger or pain in my mind, and then the thorn tree loading the wind with strong smells tells me that there's something burdensome, something difficult that the speaker is bringing about, a sharp reality that is coming back into the image the speaker has in their head. All right, 3.4. Refer to lines 13 to 16. Let me look at the entire line reference because of those ellipses showing something is being omitted. It says, now what is sunshine? Lines 13. There is a hand I never touch and a face I never see. Now what is sunshine? What is song? Now what is light to me? I immediately think to myself, the never shows that there's absolute certainty the person is gone. It's a person that they've lost. They don't see or touch their hand and face anymore. It's happening in the immediate because of the words there and now, okay? And the person is asking a rhetorical question because they've been brought back to reality and the futility of their loss. Now, what I've done there is I've described a million facts about those lines, but they're not worth any marks at all at this stage because I haven't analyzed my question. And I did that deliberately, guys, because many of you do that in the exam. You give me all the facts that you've studied about the particular area of the poem, one by one, and you don't relate them back to the question. The question says, question word, critically discuss. I need to give a detailed answer, and my detailed answer needs to give my logical and critical judgment of these lines. These particular lines are the focus area, so it's the last 4 lines of the stanza. And then with reference to what? With reference to a second focus area, them being a fitting conclusion to the poem. 3 markers are usually going to have 2 aspects that you need to discuss: diction and imagery, conclusion and the specific lines, conclusion and the context of the poem as a whole, tone and structure, etc., etc. When it's a 3 marker, make sure you discuss 2 focus areas. Okay? 3 marks in English means 2 well-discussed ideas for 3 marks. And then your special instruction, you need to take it back to the holistic message of the poem. All right, so what is the critical message? Why is this a fitting conclusion to the poem? This is a fitting conclusion to the poem because when we look at the poem as a whole, the speaker spoke about the beauty in nature, but then revealed to us that that beauty was futile or pointless in the face of the human emotion of grief. There's my first mark. I've critically discussed it. I've said that she is bringing the message of futility to us because of her feelings of grief, even though nature is beautiful. But now I need to give my evidence, my example that backs that explanation. And there are various examples that you can give. I would speak about the use of the word never, which shows us that the state of her beloved being gone is permanent and her grief is permanent and overwhelming. And then I'd refer to the rhetorical question where she shows us that all of the sunshine and the song and the light discussed earlier in the poem has been replaced by darkness, and it's pointless to her because the beauty of nature is short-lived in the face of grief. There you go. I've answered my questions. Now you might be scratching your head at this stage and asking why I haven't referred you to the marking guideline yet. It is because I want you to work on answering in your own words and structuring answers that are based on question analysis. I do not want you to learn memos off by heart. I am going to go through the memo in a moment, but I'm going to show you that even my words are not the same as the words on the memo, okay? Because I was answering as a candidate here, and markers are specialists in English who can decode and understand the work on the memo and match it to your answer if you've used synonyms that are suitable and if you have justified your response with reference to the poem. Right, so let's look at the question 3.1. I spoke about words like playful and light-hearted, all right? And I can't remember, I used a word for peaceful and calm. I can't remember what it was, but it was definitely there. So the right words are there in terms of the descriptions. There is my first mark. And then I spoke about the fact that color brings a vibrant or cheerful atmosphere because they prominent colors in nature. And I also spoke about the sun dancing and the personification being playful. So there I had 3 out of 2. You only needed 2 facts for 2 marks. The mood and 1 justifying point where you discussed the poem. Right, 3.2. Discuss the effectiveness of the use of color. All right, we needed to say that the color is vivid and that the color points to nature, and we needed to say that the yellow and green are positive signs of life, and then we could add in that the brown brings in the suggestion of death. 3 out of 2 once again. I only needed 2, hey? Or you only needed 2. Right. 3.3, we were correct because we studied hard. It is personification. And then 3.3.2, comment on how the image adds meaning to the poem. Now here I see the word ominous in the mood. The mood has become ominous. I did not use the word ominous. I used the word heaviness or burdensome. But I do think that burdensome is a good enough synonym for heaviness that I would get my mark for saying what the mood has become. And now I need to show how it adds mooding, how it adds meaning. I need to discuss this mood and judge this mood. And I spoke about how the words are negatively loaded. The word negatively or overpowering, that's what gives me my mark for critical comment here. Okay? And what is negative or overpowering? The thorn trees, which are a symbol of danger or a symbol of pain, and the word loaded, which is burdensome. There you go, I've got my 2 marks. And then 3.4, let's look at the answer for 3.4. They say that the speaker is doubtful of the goodness or purpose of light. What did I say? I said that the speaker views the world with futility, and that was my critical judgment. They match closely enough. I then discussed the word never and the fact that it's a final reference to the loss of the loved one. Nothing can make that better. And then we could have spoken about the word now and how that shows that the current time is painful and meaningless and the beauty of nature is not significant anymore. And then by ending with a question, we said a rhetorical question, the speaker gets stuck in the heaviness. And they show us that the everyday joys or the beauty of nature is empty. And we also said that. Now, how did we get 3 marks here, guys? We got 3 marks by attaching a critical discussion to the conclusion. The conclusion is futility and that everyday life is empty. What is the critical discussion? The critical discussion is building our argument and showing which specific words and phrases added meaning to the fact that the death is final and that the death overpowers the beauty of nature. In any of those examples relating to never or now or the rhetorical questions. So we need a concrete example. We need the explanation showing that the present overwhelms the previous joy that beauty brought. And then the critical discussion linked to this concluding feeling that life is not good anymore. Goodness has been overpowered. Life is futile because of the heaviness of grief. I hope that I've helped decode the memo. I hope that I've added to your understanding of The Morning Sun is Shining and equipped your poetry toolkit with some nice ammunition to build your understanding of your poems. Have a great day.